Before we look at the gameplay, let's talk about Yanagi build here first. Now you might be thinking, 37 substat is insane for an anomaly character. But this sub counting is not the traditional counting way. Yanagi here actually only has 24 substats, if we are counting only AP and attack percent sub like normally. But I think 24 substat is a deceivingly low sub count considering the context of the fight, and I believe accounting for the flat pen is needed, hence giving the 37 sub count. So you have to compare this sub count referencing how we normally count substats for 3 important stat agents like Jishuan for example, HP percent, crit rate, and crit damage. In which case, 37 substat is moderate. You have to admit 117 flat pen is higher than average, and really good against sweepers specifically. Here's why. For the half defense bosses that's newly introduced in the second half of Season 2, we know the rule of thumb is pen ratio and defense rate is not as effective against them, and you better off using damage or attack these 5. The reason lies in the damage calculation formula. You don't have to look at it too hard. Just know that damage dealt is a multiplication of many factors. One factor that we are going to talk about here is the defense multiplier. See, defense multiplier behaves differently than all of the other factors. For example, attack stat affects the damage dealt linearly, where however much you increase an agent attack stat, the damage increase comes from it will always follow a proportional and consistent manner. The slope is constant. However, defense multiplier does not scale linearly. This is the formula for the defense multiplier. The higher the defense mult value, the higher the damage. It has maximum value of 1, in which case the enemy has 0 defense. If we calculate the value of def mult with the appropriate value and plot it into a graph, with X is the pen ratio value, it shows the stark difference between half defense boss and normal defense boss damage calculation. Half defense boss defense multiplier is always higher than normal defense boss, whatever the pen ratio value is. In fact, even with no pen ratio at all, damage against half defense boss is equal to damage against normal defense boss with 50% pen ratio. That's why pen ratio this 5 is not as effective for half defense boss. The slope of increase in damage is also not as steep compared to the normal defense boss graph. On the other hand, because the half value of defense, flat pen value as a substat is higher for the half defense boss for the normal bosses. You can reference this graph to see the analytical interpretation of the defense mult value, but we can make it simple. 476 minus 117 is a 24% defense reduction, while 952 minus 117 is only about 12% defense reduction. You get the idea. Pen ratio is not good for half defense boss, and flat pen value is quite good for half defense boss. Now, does flat pen really that good to require it to be counted as an important substats? Normally, against normal defense bosses, I don't think flat pen will change the damage calculation that much. And honestly, I would still think it is also the case for the half defense boss, unless if the flat pen is really high, at least more than 60, in which case I do think it's necessary to be counted. As you see from the graph before, the slope of defense multiplier increase is steeper the higher the pen ratio value is. So the higher you stack pen ratio or flat pen, the higher the damage increase will be. This is why 32% pen ratio build with Puffer Electro 2-piece is the optimum build for some agents compared to only 24% with this 5. With that out of the way, let's see the fight. So my personal opinion about Sweeper is kinda meh. He is not that remarkable other than his beefiness. Of course, that's because he is balanced around new and future anomaly agents per level. That is Arya, Promea, Felina. Old anomaly character would probably require Nangong to get a score more than 45k. But if you can omit low score from the pile of problems, using Lycon here is a good alternative for that. I just don't want to say that you can't play Deadly Assault anymore without the new agents, as I was still having fun getting 4 stun with Lycon despite only getting a bit less 40k score. So it is like that after this, Sweeper weakness will change to Wind and Ice, with also a new look. I don't really know if it's just a new boss variant or this Ether Electric weakness Sweeper will be deleted from the game. Either way, it doesn't look like Sweeper will appear on the next 2 patch DA rotation. One important thing that you should note here is that we play Nangong just like an anomaly character. This is a double anomaly team. As she has high anomaly mastery with signature and Yuzua gives build-up buff, it's not gonna be hard to chain shock and corruption back to back. And here, even though Yanagi core passive of anomaly build-up is not active, it's not a problem since both Nangong and Yuzu gives build-up buff. Yanagi doesn't even need AMD 6 here. She is using Attack D6 for more damage, and still performs the disorder play well. Nangong damage here is actually really good. since she is on Phaeton's 4-piece. I think it's the only valid choice for her build here. Yanagi still deals half of the damage, but the damage distribution is not that far. Normally, double anomaly team damage distribution would be around 50-50. And I'm sorry to draw this comparison again, but Nangong feels a lot better as a Disorder partner for Yanagi here than Vivian. Not only Nangong proc corruption faster and more reliably, she also gives you 4 stun benefits, with all the debuffs she gives. First and foremost, Nangong value is still her debuffs and stunning capability. Her personal damage is a nice bonus, but this also helps to make the rotation easier. If you play Yanagi, you know you have to place your EX Polarity Disorder carefully. If you hit Polarity Disorder on Yuzua Assault for example, the damage is basically wasted. But for Nangong, hitting her Corruption with Yanagi Polarity is not a problem at all. Sometimes Nangong Corruption Polarity Disorder damage is better than Yanagi Shock Polarity, but maybe it's also because my Nangong build is high-end. You want 4 stun, and you want the 4th stun to be at least 15 seconds. 20 seconds is ideal. If you are having problem at getting stun faster, just try to keep proccing Disorder really fast and aggressive, as Disorder inflict daze. That's why you still want to proc Shock and Corruption back-to-back outside stun. Building Electric Meter outside stun here may be hard because Yanagi is on attack D6. That's why we use Yanagi ultimate outside stun 2 times to help keeping the Disorder chain. And if you play it right, using Yanagi's second ult early rather than saving it until stun 2 is actually good, because at the end, you can get 5 ult total just like in this run, even without Disable Generation buff, just because of how much Disorder is proc. Other than that, you can also plan Nangong dazing to hit the boss when he is on Yuzua Assault, because fun fact, Assault has secondary effect of increasing daze inflicted, so ideally, you would rather want Assault to be proc outside of stun or at the end of stun. You can also hope for good RNG to get defensive assist with Nangong. I did that twice here for the stun 3 and 4, but it's RNG and not really reliable. Sweeper defensive assist Yellow Glint also kinda slow to wait for. Overall, you still want to target as much Disorder count on each stun. I did 6 Disorder as the highest one here in this run, with 5 on the rest. Though stun 3 in particular is not that good in that regard. Even though it's still 5 Disorder, one of them is Physical Disorder, so the damage is not as high. You also need to plan Yanagi Polarity Disorder count on each stun, which means focusing generating energy on every pre-stun with basic attacks. Stun 1 rotation is quite good, and I want to show you a neat interaction of Nangong off-field Corruption proc with the rotation routing. Since we need to proc Shock and Corruption back to back, building a lot of anomaly after proccing Disorder is important. For example, after Yanagi proc Shock here with her ultimate, she builds back 80% of the meter with her EX, so that after Nangong proc Corruption later, Yanagi can swiftly proc Shock over it before running out of stun time. Then, Nangong use EX to proc Corruption. She can proc it off-field, so immediately swap to Yuzua for EX to trigger Chain. Nangong proc Corruption right before Chain is triggered, which leaves Ether meter on 0 at this point. So then, we use Nangong Chain attack to build the meter back up again. Then we repeat it again to Yanagi Shock, Nangong Corruption, Shock, and Yuzua close the last Disorder with Assault. I really like Nangong Chain Attack. It is really useful and versatile for optimizing Disorders on stun rotation, and you should get used to utilizing it. Since building Ether meter is not cheap, you have to use Nangong energy for EX and Upbeat for enhanced basic inside stun, which sometimes you can't really do, because you also need to save those resources for dazing outside stun. You see that we interchange Yuzua Aftershock attribute between Electric and Ether. Generally, we want Yuzua to build Ether inside stun for Nangong and help build Electric outside stun for Yanagi. But even with Yuzua helps, the stun rotation is still quite tricky without careful planning. As you see in the previous table, stun 2, 3, and 4 don't have as high of Disorder count as stun 1. That's because stun 1 has benefit of full energy at start of stun from the shield break, so there's a lot of resource to them. Well, after that, we have a tricky optimization problem of Nangong needing resource to stun, while also want to save it to build Anom inside stun. The rotation here is viable because of Metamorph buff free energy and stun duration extend. Both Yanagi and Nangong really need that energy. Without it, the routing will change entirely and I'm not sure how that would go.